Hi everyone and welcome to this small little discussion about load balance and manifolds, right? So, I want to give you the, I guess, most essential thing up front before we dive into three different topics. And just, what is the difference, right? What is the actual difference between a load balanced setup and a manifolded setup? Gameplay-wise, there's literally just one, right? And that is how fast you reach 100% efficiency on the whole setup. To make this very clear and obvious, right, I have set up a load balanced setup with 8 smelters and a manifold setup with 8 smelters, right? Both of these will process 240 iron ore into 240 iron ingots, right? And we do have our conveyor throughput readings set up in front of these awesome sinks, right? And we are just going to provide power to both of these miners, and then we will see just how absolutely different this can be, right? So, let's do exactly that, right? You can see the resources are coming in, right? Here we are load balancing it, and yeah, the distance of, or the length of the belts also pays into this, right? We will have a slight inefficiency in the beginning, but very quickly all of these 8 smelters will work at 100%, right? Whereas these guys need to fill up their buffers completely before they can reach that, right? So you might think in the beginning, oh, the manifold is so much quicker, right? It's so much quicker to start up and produce more. It won't take long until the load balance setup will surpass this and stay ahead for the amount of time it takes to completely fill up the manifold, right? So in my testing, I figured it was roughly between 1 and 2 minutes where the load balance would actually take over. And you can see this in action right here, it just happened, right? Our load balance setup is now producing more already. And once we reach the 240 stable on the output, we will clearly see how the manifold is behind that. Yeah, look, the readings on the throughput monitor indicates already 240 here in the graph, right? And this number will slowly adjust to the graph, and there it is, right? Well, look over here, 137, and this is a fluctuation of 150 down to 60, up to 120, back to 150. And if you take a look at the machines, right, we have a lot of stop and go here in the beginning, and we haven't even backed up completely the first. There we go. Now we are there, right? Now we are here, where we slowly will see how this is started, or how this will start to back up. There it is, right? And once it is fully backed up on the belt, we will provide more resources up front, and that way we will get more and more on the output. We will near our 100% efficiency over time, right? As I stated though, in the end we will see a reading of 240 on both of these belts, without a doubt, right? So, let's jump into some basic examples, right? The very basic one, and that is what we are all doing in the beginning of a playthrough. Once we unlock a splitter, right, our immediate step is going to be this. We will have our 2 smelters, and we are going to divide our input of, in this case, we are just going to say this is 60 per minute, and we divide it into 2 parts of 30 each, right? There we go. Or we provide 90 and divide it into 3, right? Once we have the Mark II belts. And that is your very first load balancing, basically, right? So let's just think about the next step, right? What if we do have a pure node and Mark II belts, and we want to split up equally, right? It's so easy to set up, right, that most of the time, unconsciously, you will just go for a setup like roughly this, right? Where you bring in 120 resources, you split it into 260 paths, and then into 230s each. And you are load balancing, right? Subconsciously in the beginning most of the time, but you are actually load balancing your setups. Now, I think the first point where it actually makes sense to think about manifolds, right, is once you have the Mark III belts, right? Basically, when you start steel production, that is where it really comes to help you out, right? So, our basic examples over here, I call them basic, but you know what I mean, right? We still are not where we need to be, right? We still have these fluctuations, and if you take a look, yeah, we just need to wait until the buffers of the second machines here, they are nearing, right, and then the third machines. We just need to wait for that. And that is, as I stated, basically the biggest difference, right? We all know how easy it is to split into 2 or 3, or into multiples of 2 and 3, right? That is all easy, not too difficult. But what if you want to split into 5, right? I think the 5-way split is something that you can utilize a lot of the time. Let's say, let's take smart plating as an example here, right? Yeah, you can just set up a manifold for this, but if you want to have 10 smart plating per minute, you will need 5 of these guys. Sure, you can overclock and do shenanigans like that, right? However, I just want to show you, it is possible to split 5 ways. It involves just a little bit. I called this testing, but I know for a fact that this works out perfectly fine, right? And we can run a single example here of where we try to show this off in a manner where I think all of us can get a lot out of it, right? So maybe this needs to be, yeah. Let's also switch over this throughput monitor over here, right? So we want to split into 5 outputs, right? Now we are limited to the 2 and 3-way splits on each splitter, right? So how do we achieve this? Well, basically we need 6 equal belts, right? And then we need to split our 6th belt back, or merge it back onto our input line. And once everything has run through this, we will have a 5-way split, right? So for now, don't look at the throughput monitors. Let's just see what happens if you put in 100 of the reinforced iron plates here. As you can see, we split 3 ways first, right? And then into 2 lanes on all of these splitters, and we feed back everything, or like half of this splitter here. And it will redistribute alongside these containers, right? There we go, we're almost there. The last one is coming back, and this just works because the way splitters are programmed actually work out this way, right? So we have 20 in here, we can use the dismantle tool, 20, 20 in every single container. Isn't that amazing, right? That is so cool in my opinion. So, to make this a little bit more easy to take a look at, let's use a merging line, right? Where we take all of these outputs, like so, and the main output we will throw into the awesome sink, right? We take a quick glance over here, it reads 220, and yeah, we seem to near our 100% efficiency, right? We still can see this is not yet receiving enough iron ore per minute, but if you take a look at the next ones, these will now start filling up and backing up, right? So, what we can do now is take our Mark III belt, right? And I think this is set up, yep, for center output. If we redirect our center output now to our 5-way split, like so, we can use the throughput monitors to see that these 5 belts and this one over here should read the same number once it has stabilized everything, right? So let's leave this running for a little bit. And we are nearing the magical number of 48. Why is that important? If we take our 240 divided by 5, that is what we need, right? So, what we want is 48 on all of these 6 belts. And that might seem strange at the moment, But as you can see, it has been stabilized now, where we get 96 on all of these three, so that's 288, right? Why is that? Well, remember, we are adding in the 48 to the 240 here, right? So you need to be careful with your belt speeds as well. Just as a heads up, right? This needs to be able to carry that, which is why this is a Mark IV at the moment. And yeah, so we can clearly see how these are distributed evenly with this one as well, right? So, does it make sense to then combine it and sync it? No, but it does demonstrate that the 5-way split works very nicely, right? And we could set up 5 constructors at the end of this that need like the 48 iron. Oh, whoops. Iron pipe is a good one for that, right? I would assume. How many? Yeah, 12 per minute, right? Would be 48. If we set up 5 of these guys, right, we will have it perfectly load balanced. Taking a glance over at our manifold, we can see we still get some dips here, right? And that just tells us, we also just heard how these are start and stop, or stop and go, right? We are nearing, though, we are nearing the moment of where this will fill up, right? And so we are not far off, right? But it took us like way more time to reach a stable output. Alrighty, that brings us to the point of how do I decide when I want to use which one, right? Because clearly with this experiment we can see, oh, for the ores it would make so much more sense to use a load balanced setup. However, once I unlocked Mark III belts, you have seen me use manifolds more often, right? And it just also comes down to personal preference. We can still see a yellow flashing light, right? So we know this is still not running at 100% efficiency, even like quarter an hour in, right? So we still have these stop and goes and fluctuations, whereas the load balanced setup has been running clean for a long time, right? So why then? Why would we use a manifold? Let's, for example, take our steel setup, right? It's way more easy to set up, so it's convenience, right? Not gonna lie, that is a huge factor in how I decide, right? Convenience. And also, what do I do once the next step comes in, right? Remember, in the steel factory, we use a manifold to smelt our steel ingots, but then we load balance them, right? So, with the next step we decided, okay, we have the exact amounts that we needed split up, so where does the decision take place, right? It's actually already in the planning phase, right? So that is something that I try to do. I look at the numbers that I'm getting, right? I play around with the exact amounts step by step, right? To where I'm ending at a point where I feel like, oh, that is very easy to do, or I can just use a manifold and it will work itself out over time. So, speaking of this, right, if we take a look at, this is a load balanced 8 constructor manifold, right? However, what that means is, this only works if every single constructor uses the same amount of resources, right? Once I go into a manifold setup though, I am free to use whatever input amount I need, because I do know over time this will absolutely work itself out, right? And that is the biggest thing for the decision process in my eyes, right? I'm still able to merge up these outputs to the amounts that I need, right? But for the inputs, I can have iron plates here and then cast screws here, and we have very different amounts of stuff needed, right? But I know over time this will work itself out. And then I will have the merged outputs here that I can process further, either into manifolds or into load balancers as the next step, right? So for me it's often, as I said, a convenience thing, but it is also a numbers thing out of planning, where I see, oh, I will have my 240 iron for my starter base, right? I knew I would have 120 for the reinforced iron plates. I worked out all the numbers there, and that is also, right? We ended up with, let's just set this up, right? We ended up with 3 constructors producing screws, because we needed 120, right? So I knew from the beginning, right? I knew that I wanted to set this up like so, right? I will merge up my 3 constructors, and then we had our reinforced iron plates here, and we knew we could run 2 of those, right? So we know 120 per minute here and 60 plates per minute, right? So all we need to get 60 plates is 3 of these constructors. So would you look at that? We have an easy way to load balance our, like, after the smelting, like our first production step here, right? We can load balance both of those quite easily, right? And then we can take the outputs of those and load balance them again, right? And that way we just know, without a doubt, that everything is going to work out quite neatly here, right? So, just as an example, set this up, right? This is going to be our 60 plates, 13 to each output. Very easy. And then this actually would do the lifts like that, facing each other, right? Get ourselves a splitter. Move that somewhere into the middle here, just as an example now, right? Where, oopsie, that isn't placed very... That was placed really poorly. Let's line this up correctly, like so. Go. And we know that we need a Mark II here. That's Mark IV, but that's fine. Right, there we go. Right, so we now have our 120 split up, right, equally, load balanced all of this, right, the whole production chain, and that's very easy. But we can only do this because we know, hey, we are going to need multiples of 30 basically. These 3 constructors need 30, and each of these ones need 30. So what we need to do, right, is grabbing fourths, right? So that's how I think about these things a lot of the time, right? We're going to also just grab ourselves a merger somewhere. I don't know. Maybe here, just to make it a little bit clearer. Actually, you know what? That merger would make a lot of sense over here, right? So, we would bring in our 120, right? So we know we can link up, we know we can link up 60 of those. Or split 60, right? And then we just split 30 and 30 again, right? And since this is 90 now, we are just going to use a Mark II belt. And now we know, okay, so 120 comes in, 60, 60, and then 30, and this is 60 plus 30, right? And then you have load balanced all of this. So this makes a whole bunch of sense in my head, right? Rearranging the inputs to something I can split into quite easily, like this. Right? And that works out fairly nicely in this example. But that's mainly also because we are using an input, right, on all of those, that is divided by the same, by a multiple of 2 or a multiple of 3, right? And that makes it really easy for us to deal with all of this, right? Now, when does the manifold come into play then? For me, as I said, it's a convenience thing, but also it makes a whole bunch of sense, right? If you do have a manifold here, we're just going to provide everything, all our ingots, right? And then we set this up the way we want. We can still have our different outputs here, right? So let's say, there we go. Maybe even have some of these in there, right? This isn't probably going to work out, but that way we have a manifold in between, right, where we produce a lot of the different parts for our next step. And I think the one factory that will illustrate this quite nicely is when we go into our phase 2 factory, right, which will come down the line. I think that will highlight very well why I then went for some manifold setups, and also how we are able to let these guys warm up in the background while we are working on something else, on the next step of our production. Now would you look at that? As stated in the beginning of the video, both outputs are equal. The only variable is the time it takes until you get to this result, right? And as I said, also convenience, right? Space can be an argument, however, I'm sure you can fabricate a blueprint that is load balanced, that doesn't take way more space than a manifold, right? But yeah, it's a case of ease of use, so convenience again, right? But also what you exactly need out of it. Do you have outputs that are easy to hook up in a way of, okay, I have the same input, right, for everything, and I can... This is also okay for a 5-way split, right? What you see me do often is I could do a 5-way split. I could also do a 6-way, right? Which is way easier to set up, and then just underclock all 6 machines equally, right? So it kind of stinks to say it depends. To each their own, right? It's personal preference as well. I just think both of the approaches are very valuable, and feel free to mix and match, right? That was quite a long one, I guess, to get to the conclusion, but yeah, for me personally, as I said, it's mostly convenience, personal preference, and also mix and matching them, right? So hopefully that has answered some of the questions regarding manifolds and load balancing, right? If you want to know more things, please let me know in the comment section down below, right? And yeah, I think that concludes this little excursion into load balancing and manifold usage, with introducing the 5-way split as a very good example, I think, of just using fractions, I guess, to make things work, right? So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care. Bye!